Hey everyone, recently Darren Latham announced a 90s Marine Challenge on Instagram, and I thought it was a wicked idea. I haven't painted one of these models since I was a kid, so too long ago. And I've also always loved Howling Griffons and never been brave enough to paint them, so I decided to kill two birds with one stone. So this is my entry into the 90s Marine Challenge. This is how I painted it. As always, I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. For the colours on this, the red is going to be made up of Games Workshop Khorne Red, Games Workshop Mephiston Red, and then we're going to be adding in some Vallejo model colour white. Any white will do, I just prefer Vallejo model colour. For the yellow, we're going to be using Games Workshop Khorne Red, Games Workshop Trollslayer Orange, Games Workshop Yriel Yellow. For the Aquila, the eagles, the wings on his chest, we're going to be using Games Workshop Mechanicus Standard Grey, Games Workshop Dawnstone Grey, and then a little bit of white. And then for the silver, we're going to be using Scale 75 Black Metal, Scale 75 Heavy Metal. So the first thing to do, we're base coating the model in pure black. I just prefer black. It makes it easier to paint into, like if there's any leftover bits in the recesses, no one notices it. What we're going to do, Games Workshop Khorne Red. Now I'm painting this in a very sketchy kind of style. I want lots of brush marks all over it. I want the armor to look quite rough. Although we're going to go for quite a high contrast finish, I want a very rough finish. I don't want to do it all smooth, which is why I didn't use the airbrush, and it's why what you'll find is my brush marks are very messy, and I use the tip of my brush quite a lot. But the first thing to do is lay the Khorne down, Games Workshop Khorne Red down. Now you can see that I started off with painting each quarter separately, and then I realized that the Games Workshop Khorne Red was going to be the base color for both the yellow and the red quarters. So at this point, what you can actually do is just base coat the whole thing in red. I just didn't think about it at the time. Now I'm using quite transparent paint here, and I'm doing a couple of coats of transparent paint. But what's important to note is I don't actually need perfect coverage. I want some of the really dark black to come through. The red is kind of there just to tint the colors that we put over the top. So the first one that we're putting down, we're doing the yellow side first. So this is the Games Workshop Fire Dragon Bright. And what I start with is, for anyone who's seen me paint before, I tend to sketch when I'm doing individual pieces quite a lot. So what that means is I'll paint in all of my volumes very, very roughly, and then I'll refine them later on. So that's what I'm doing here. You can see there's lots of little marks, like I'm not painting neatly or cleanly at all. Using the tip of my brush, and I'm just making a big mess, but I'm pointing out, I'm defining the shapes of the highlights that I want. And this takes a couple of coats, just because orange is generally quite a weak color. It doesn't generally cover very well. So you can see like I've got 2 or 3 coats of orange going on. The red is to stop our base coat from looking black, and the orange is almost like the transitional color before we get to the yellow. And this is really important. So basically what's going to happen is you need to be very careful, because your dominant color that you paint on the model is going to be what the model appears as. So at the moment it's very, very orange due to the Fire Dragon Bright. So what you need to do with the next stage is when you place the yellow in, which is what we're doing now, this is the Games Workshop Yriel Yellow, you need to make sure that you cover enough of the orange for this to actually look yellow. Otherwise you'll end up with an orange result. But you can see, nice and simple, really, really messily just putting it on. The main reason I like sketching is because it gives me an idea on whether the volumes are going to be in the right place, and also it gives me a good idea on how the colors are going to interact. So you can see that I've got this yellow, the Yriel Yellow now down. What I've done is, all I've done is added some white to the yellow to give me basically my final highlight. If you wanted to buy a paint for this, any kind of ivory would do. Vallejo model color Ice Yellow is excellent as a highlight for yellow. I'm not sure about a GW equivalent, but basically what you're looking for is like a yellow ivory, or even just a normal ivory will do. Next up, we do the right side. Exactly the same sort of concept, very, very messily painting on. This is the Games Workshop Mephiston Red. The Mephiston Red just gives it a little bit of like vibrancy to it. Mephiston Red is quite, it's quite a bright, saturated red. Now, you need to make a decision here on what sort of red you want to go for. I knew that I didn't want like a blood red for these. I wanted to do something a little bit paler. with a little bit more white in it. So if you just want a very vibrant saturated red like I have here, then skip this stage ultimately. But I didn't want that. So all I did was added a bit of white to the red, and I'm sketching in again my highlight placements. So you can see how messy this looks. And I know a lot of people think I'm mad when I have these sketchy, messy stages, but I really like them. Now I've skipped ahead here. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to start blending this together now. And you can see what the legs look like already. So I've obviously done the legs off camera. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm going to show you how to do the blends on the arm. There's no point me doing the whole model because the model took me about 3 or 4 hours and it's going to be a really long video. I apologize, but it's time for that shameless plug. If you are enjoying the video or you are finding it useful, please hit the like button and let me know what you think in the comments below. It makes a huge difference to the growth of the channel and it makes a big difference to me. If you do want to know about my upcoming videos, then make sure that you hit the subscribe button. And you know what? If you want to join the community, feel free to check out the Discord link in the description below. It's completely free. Come share some work and say hello. Lastly, if you do want to go that little bit further and you do want to support and you do want to get even more video content from myself, feel free to check out the Patreon. But regardless on any of that, thank you everyone just for watching. It means a huge amount to me. When it comes to the blending, the idea with this is I'm using a semi-transparent paint and I'm trying to break the transitional lines between the colors. So in this case, you can see that I've got Yriel Yellow on my brush and I work from the orange area into the yellow area in the hopes that what that's going to do is it's going to minimize how extreme the transitional line is between the two. Now, you will notice that I'm using the tip of my brush. I've said this quite a few times now. The reason why I'm using the tip of my brush is because it gives a much more messy result, as in it makes lots of brush marks all over the place. So this gives me a much more worn finish. If you want something smoother, then basically don't use the tip of your brush, use the side of your brush. But you can see that I've got, again, Yriel Yellow on my brush. I'm building up my volume. So in this case, that's a secondary bounce light on the underneath. Edge highlights go in to create readability of shape on the arm. And the only time, so basically what you can do is you're jumping between the orange and you're jumping between the yellow with a semi-transparent paint. As you can see, the orange is on my brush now, and you're smoothing out those transitional lines between the yellow and the orange. Basically, the amount of time that you spend on it will dictate how strong the result is going to be at the end. And it's up to you. Like, not everything needs to be a masterpiece. This is far from it. This is far from a Golden Demon entry. But the transitions are good enough. And actually, by the end of it, all of the little brush marks are really nice. You can see this last paint, this last layer here. This is Games Workshop Yriel Yellow with a little bit of white. The white is what pushes the shine into the upper embrace. And then the underneath bounce light only goes to yellow. So this is really important. On the upper arm, the highlight goes up to a mix of Yriel Yellow and white, which is what I'm painting there. But the bounce light on the underside of that cylindrical arm only goes to Yriel Yellow. So our bounce lights are not as bright as our main light. And you can see it looks really quite nice. So it's relatively simple, although obviously it can be quite challenging to do. I'm not going to pretend like this is easy. But remember, you don't need to go for perfect blends all of the time. Now, on the flip side of that, with the Khorne Red, with the red itself, what we're doing is we're working with a lot of pinks. Now, if you want this armor to not look pink, what you need to do is the dominant color, as in the majority of the area needs to be covered in red. There's nothing wrong with using pink as a highlight for red. You just can't have too much pink. So you can see here, as I'm bringing in my highlights, this is the Mephiston Red with a little bit of white in it. I'm painting in the edges to give some nice readability of shape, and I'm pushing up my highlights. And what's happening is I'm losing a lot of the red, so this is starting to look very, very pink. And there's nothing wrong with that because we can fix that later on. So the aim of this part is I'm using my pinks to build up my gradual transition with all of those little brush marks. You can see all the scratches and marks that I'm painting. I'm using this pink, this Mephiston Red and white mix to basically build my transition to give me my value range, my contrast range. And then what I can do is I can introduce more red later on, which is what I'm doing here. So with red, the difficulty is is red is actually quite a dark color as a general rule, especially when you put it over black. So in my experience, it's better to go too bright and then glaze over your red afterwards to knock it all back and reintroduce the color. So just to clarify, I used the Mephiston Red and White mix to bring in my edge highlights and to push my volume highlights as bright as I wanted them to go. And then afterwards, I used the red to glaze it back down and reintroduce the color and lose the power of the pink. So we lose the majority of the pink. So you can see me, again, softening out this transition with lots and lots of little marks. And for anyone who wants to know how I do this in depth, there's plenty of videos on the Patreon on how I build texture and transitions with different brush techniques. This is one of them. But you can see the transitions are there. I'm pushing almost all the way to white. So again, this is that mix of Mephiston Red and White, and I'm just adding more and more white as I want to go brighter until I push all the way up to pure white. So you can see like there's a real shine to this now. The problem with it is it's a little bit too bright. It's a little bit too pink. It's a little bit too extreme, and it's too bright in comparison to the leg. We do want the upper half of the marine to be bright in comparison to the leg, but we don't want it this extreme. It's just a little bit too much. So again, we can knock it back. And this is where we start glazing over the red now. So this is where we start reintroducing our color. And you can see, there we go. So a glaze, remember, is an incredibly transparent layer of paint. So where previously we were using semi-transparent, in this case, we're using very transparent paint. And the idea is that we're going over all of these red areas, and you can see it reintroducing the color and knocking back how extreme those highlights are and knocking back how extreme the pink is. And then lastly, it's just a case of painting in my little edges and making sure my recesses are nice and defined with a nice dark line, so we have nice readability of shape. Next, the Aquila is really simple. Games Workshop and Mephiston Grey. Paint a solid base coat over, and then what we're going to do with Games Workshop Dawnstone Grey is we're going to place in some nice neat highlights along the top of the wings and along the feathers. Now when it comes to this, remember, if you're trying to do really neat work, to steady your hands, make sure the model is braced correctly as well as your hands, and then exhale as you do your brush stroke, and it will help steady any shaky hands that you might have. Anyone who knows and sees me paint knows that my hands shake quite a lot. If you exhale and control your breathing as you do it, it will steady your hands and make things a lot better. If for whatever reason you can't do this, then just paint them Dawnstone Grey and do like a non-oil wash over them. That will do the job as well. It's just I wanted something a little bit more extreme here. I wanted something with a little bit more control, but that's relatively simple with this. And then lastly, I added a little bit of white to the Dawnstone Grey, and I picked out the edges of the feathers just to make them pop a little bit more. So the silvers are really easy. The silver, I did a layer of Scale 75 Black Metal, which is a really dark silver. And then I put a non-oil wash over the top. And then I had Scale 75 Heavy Metal, and I just put some edge highlights in. Nice and simple. And then lastly, on the gun, I just did a black casing, and I put some Dawnstone Grey edge highlights. So lastly, I just wanted to say thank you everyone who has watched this video. It means a huge amount to me. I am going to be putting out even more YouTube video content again. Finally got time to really get back into this. So if there's things that you want to see, if there's tutorials you want to see, if there's subjects you want me to cover, whatever it is, leave them in the comments below. I will add it to the list and I will make it happen. But once again, thank you for all the support. I really appreciate it.